let's go into what actually is a code review. So some formal definition here, but basically when a developer writes new code, or product owner, could be, I don't know, and they want to get it into the code base, they ask another developer to review their code, and the reviewer can look and find certain issues or find certain improvements that can be made. And when that's approved, it can go into the main code base. That's kind of the gist of what a code review is, right? So why would you do a code review? So who can tell me, how do you know your code is readable? Can you tell me?
The clear rule is, oh, sorry.
It's OK.
When altogether we define how we write the code, define the spaces, all the structure of the code.
OK, OK.
And readable more faster for everyone.
Yeah, so you define a structure for everyone to follow.
Yeah.
And OK, and anyone else? You? Yeah?
When someone else follow that, you can read it.
That's the one, exactly. When someone else can read your code, that's how you know it's readable. And the structure is very important because that's what you fall back onto, and that's what everyone understands. And that should help you achieve the goal of having someone else be able to read your code, because I can follow PSR2 and still make code you wouldn't understand. I don't do that every day, generally. So readability, right? Architecture is also very important. When you have this, well, let's say it's a pull request in front of you, these changes, you can really think about, what we just built. Does it really fit into our architecture? I'm not saying you should always look at that after you build a feature, but it's still a good way of checking, like, OK, so we made a decision on how we're going to build this. But let's evaluate this. This is actually working out. And you can reevaluate this during a code review. And then we have sharing knowledge. Also very interesting, because to me, one of the best ways of onboarding someone is actually having that person do code reviews. Reason for that is when you do a code review, you can see this feature is being introduced, and this part changes, and this part changes of the system. And that's very useful information. So that person now knows that if that person has to introduce a certain feature, it knows where he or she knows where to look at the moving parts of the application, basically. So that's a very interesting way of onboarding someone. Next to that, I don't really like documentation myself, so I much rather do code reviews to keep it going and just keep my knowledge up. And then, of course, we have bugs. It's a very straightforward one. During a code review, you're going to look into bugs. And that's actually very interesting because, of course, we all have like testers that test our code. But they actually test our functionality. And most testers don't know how it's actually implemented. As a developer, you have this interesting insight where you know how it's built. So you also know possible weaknesses, and you can actually make use of that in testing it through the interface or whatever. So that's also a very interesting point of view. Now, I mentioned pull requests, but there's a few different types of code reviews, and these are two of them. So on the right, you have the pull request review, which can be done remotely, and you can use pretty much any versioning software that has code reviews. I think SVN has Gerrit? We're in the Netherlands, we can say Gerrit. And GitHub has the PRs, Bitbucket, et cetera, et cetera. And on the left side, you have pair programming, which is also a very interesting, a little bit different type of code review, but it's still a code review. And I'll go into both of these. So the pull request review, like I said, basically looks like this. You have a pull request which has a title, and it has a description where you say, OK, so I built this and that, and perhaps this is how you can test it. And you can assign people to it, and you have a little files change tab there in which you can see what the actual code change is. And this is the same for most systems. So that was GitHub. It's still called GitHub, right? Or did I miss something? Yeah, OK. I don't know. They move fast. And what is this? Bitbucket. Yeah, so you have Bitbucket, and you have also GitLab. These are the examples I gave you. But then we also have pair programming. Who here has done pair programming before? Oh, OK, why am I even standing here? Who does it every day? Ah, see, that's different. Okay, cool. So pair programming, you basically, I didn't need to tell you this, but you have a driver, the person who actually writes the code and who's at the keyboard bashing away. And then you have the navigator, who's someone who looks, I guess, at the bigger picture and thinks about the solution you're building, but also thinks about, hey, you know, we're building this right now, but maybe we should also change this part of the system, like it affects each other, right? So you can have a bit more of a zoomed out point of view, which is very interesting. And the interesting part about pair programming is it's actually the shortest possible feedback loop. Because with a pull request, you have to make the pull request, you have to wait for someone to look at the pull request, and then you'll get feedback from someone. Whereas with pair programming, it's immediate, right? As you're writing it, you're both thinking about it, and that pretty much makes it the shortest possible feedback loop. Now, there are some other people who do this thing called mob programming. Who's done mob programming? I haven't. Oh, so I haven't. Okay, so I don't put my hand up. Yeah, okay. That's quite a few people, actually. Who does it every day? I'm so happy no one put their hand up. Yeah, so mob programming, you have one driver there, and you have multiple navigators, which is very fun. I don't know if you've ever sat behind a computer with 4 developers, but that wasn't a good experience for me. So, no, but in all seriousness, it can be very useful. To me, it's useful when you're building this new feature, and it's quite impactful on your application. It could mean a lot for your architecture, or it can be really complex. And at that point, it might actually be a good idea to just do 15 minutes, maybe half an hour of mob programming. Just look at the problem together, and just write some code, just some mock-up code, some proof of concept, and that way you can all get a sense of what the problem is like and what the solution could be. So yes, it is useful, but don't overdo it, I guess, unless it of course works for you. So a while ago, I think it's 2 years ago now, I did a survey on Twitter. Mind you, there's a huge selection bias in my survey. Because if I tweet something, then it's mostly the people in the community, which is you all, that I reach. And those are also the people that are more likely to be exposed to presentations and to have a company culture where code reviews are normal. So not all the questions are very representative of the entire field of IT, unfortunately, but it's still very interesting what I saw. So one of the first things I asked is, do you have colleagues review your code? Who has colleagues review their code? Oh my God, why are you here? No, there will be some tips and tricks, don't worry. Okay, so I couldn't exactly count, but 73% said yes. 17% said only when I ask. For who, it's only when I ask. A few people here? Yeah, a few people. Okay, yeah. That's fine, don't worry. Then we use pair programming as a form of code review. Who has that? You don't really do code reviews with just pair programming? Okay, like 5 or 6 people, okay. And then we have no, we only rely on automated tools, or no, a tester only functionally tests the code, or just no. So here's the follow-up question. Do you feel like you learn a lot from giving and receiving code reviews? Who feels they learn a lot from giving and receiving code reviews? Almost everyone. That's awesome. Okay, cool. So I've given this presentation quite a few times, and I get different results. And in a smaller group, you can actually see the people who don't put up their hand, and it's sort of similar. There's usually 1 or 2 people who are like, nah, not really, which is fine. I don't judge. It's whatever you get out of it, right? But 96% says, yes, I do feel like I learn a lot from giving and receiving code reviews. And then I asked, do you enjoy getting your code reviewed? Who enjoys getting their code reviewed? I swear there are less hands now. So 87% said yes. And 13% said no, usually, but sometimes I find it hard to accept feedback or deal with criticism. And I'll be very honest, I was part of the 13% in the beginning. When I started working at NRISE, where we did code reviews every day, it was a bit, I mean, I'm not someone with a big ego, but it was still very difficult to have someone constantly give feedback on the things that you build. That's a normal thing for people to have, right? So I was having some difficulty every now and then to really be constructive about it. So I looked into this a little bit more, and I came across this term, egoless programming. Who's heard of egoless programming before? I guess two. Okay, perfect. See, this is where you learn things. So egoless programming. I'll read it out to you. Developers need a robust enough ego to trust and defend their work, but not so much ego that they reject suggestions for better solutions. Similarly, the egoless reviewer should have compassion and sensitivity for their colleagues, if only because their rules will be reversed one day. Now, there's a very interesting detail in here. Is they're really talking about egoless programming, not the egoless programmer. Right? There's a big difference. As a programmer, you need an ego because you need to be proud of what you build. You need to have confidence in what you do and trust your own work. But the work itself should not have an ego. The work itself should be, you should be able to shoot at it without hurting someone's feelings, right? That's ideal. I mean, you can't always do that, but that's ideal. So I looked into this a little bit further, and I came across this, the 10 Commandments of Egoless Programming. So this is going a little bit off topic of code reviews, but I think it's very interesting still to share it with you. So the first one is understand and accept that you will make mistakes. Like I said in the beginning of the presentation, it's very important to make mistakes because that's how you move forward, right? That's where you learn the most from. So understand and accept it. You are not your code. Yeah? It's egoless programming, not the egoless programmer. There's a big difference. No matter how much karate you know, someone else will always know more. In fact, this is one of the rules that I live by. I read somewhere, I don't know where, but somewhere it said, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Because when you're the smartest person in the room, that means, well, smartest on some specific subjects, it means that you have to put in a lot of effort to keep improving yourself and keep learning new things, right? You have to really go out there and go to these conferences. It's all scary and stuff, and you have to really get all this information by yourself. Whereas if you're working in a company where there's a lot of people who are smarter than you can learn a lot from them. It becomes a lot easier to do that on a daily basis, right? Don't rewrite code without a consultation. If you think there's a certain piece of code which is like, oh, it's array map functions and array walk instead of a for loop, and we've all had that, right? Who prefers array functions over for loops? Everyone? A little bit scared. Yeah, so, but the point is, don't just rewrite that because you think the other solution is better. Always go to the actual original developer or someone else in your team and ask, is there a reason why we did it that way? And at least talk about it, and don't just change it. Otherwise, you'll just change it, and the other person comes across and changes it again, and you get this battle of commits, and it's really awkward. Treat people who know less than you with respect, deference, and patience. I am not explaining this one. Read the code of conduct. The only constant in the world is change. Your code's going to change. Requirements are going to change. It's a fact. Your code is not meant to last. You hope it does, but it's not meant to last. The business changes, right? The only true authority stems from knowledge, not from position. This is a very important one, actually. It doesn't really matter if you're a lead developer, senior, CTO, or junior. None of that matters. What matters is what do you know? What do you know that is important to others? If you have put a year worth of your time into learning about mobile development, there should not be a single other senior developer who works on PHP be like, I know this better than you, so I should be the authority on this. No, the authority is the person who actually knows about this, who has the knowledge, right? Titles don't matter. They shouldn't. Fight for what you believe, but gracefully accept defeat. Also speaks for itself. If you're in a discussion with someone and you're like, okay, maybe the other person has a point. The other person has a point. Accept it and accept your defeat, move on, and improve. Because what matters is your code. What matters is the team, the project, and not your own personal opinion, right? That sounded kind of wrong and out of context. Your personal opinion does matter, but in the end, it has to be constructive, right? Don't be the guy in the room. This refers to the person who comes in, grabs a coffee, sits behind his desk, puts the headphones on, and just doesn't talk to anyone, does his or her thing, and goes home at whatever time. Don't be that person. You have to somewhat socialize with people, as scary as it is. I'm sorry. And critique code instead of the people. Be kind to the code, not to the code. Again, this is the egoless programming, not the egoless programmer. So what do you look for during a code review? In no particular order, I see someone's taking a photo. Did I ruin it for you?
That was just
You were. We have time. We have plenty of time. There you go. I'll just stand here as well, like this. Yeah. Don't forget the hashtag WeCamp18. Are you done? I can't see if you're done. Give me feedback. Come on. Oh, that. Yeah, sorry. Hurry up.
just a little bit longer.
I'm done. So, what to look for during a code review? Everyone has it, right? So, in no particular order, unhappy paths. You know, as a developer, you're kind of happy when a feature works, right? You're proud of it, like, hey, it works. I see this button there. I'm so happy. It took me loads of CSS to get it working. But always think about unhappy paths. What would happen if this server would have coffee poured onto it? You don't actually have to do it, but what happens if? What happens if this third-party cloud service goes down or something else crashes? I mean, you have to think whether it's relevant for your project. I mean, does your project really need that resilience? But if it does, then make sure you look for it as well. And also, you know, think about the exceptions. Think about the exceptions. It sounds weird. Are the tests added? For me, it's always important not to look at how many tests you have, but at the percentage, the code coverage, basically. I'm not going to go into the 100%, not 100% code coverage discussion, but just make sure that when you introduce a new feature, that the code coverage stays at least the same. Right? Preferably goes up a little, but at least the same. Is the feature implemented according to specs? When you have, for example, a pull request, you have the description where you say, okay, so I built this. Always make sure to go back to the original ticket to see if that was actually according to what the product owner or whoever wrote it, if it's actually correct. And if you're not sure, then you can always go to the product owner and ask, so is this actually what you wanted? And just make sure that it's according to the specs. And another important one is the performance. Who here works with a very performance-important application? Performance. Do you have performance tests run? It's quiet. Why is it so quiet? Do you? Yeah?
No.
So how often do you run those performance tests?
Each version once a week.
Once a week. Okay, cool. So there are not a lot of people that do performance tests continuously. Like they, you know, we check things, like we build something, and then they're like, all right, we're almost live. Let's just throw some bots against it to see how it holds up. And then it holds up, and then we grow, but we sort of forget to continuously check for performance. And if performance is important for you, then it might be interesting to invest some time into making sure there are tests running. And you don't have to run those tests on every pull request or anything, but at least, you know, like every week is that's pretty good. That's cool. Also, don't overdo it. Don't go into the, is underscore null is better or worse than, yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, single quotes to double quotes. Yeah, double quotes, more, it's heavier on performance because it uses interpolation and that's a check. A single, okay, I'll stop. Security, also very important. I actually forgot this one in the first version of my talk and someone pointed this out to me and I'm very happy that he did. As developers, we're kind of spoiled now. And this is also interesting to think about. The developers that come into our field today are the developers that grow up to use a lot of abstraction layers. And even though abstraction layers are cool, they're really cool because no one really wants to write that low-level code constantly, you do forget what you're actually working with. You do sometimes become lazy when it comes to security. And that's dangerous. Now, it's always good to know, you know, what does this abstraction layer actually do? And it's good to know the risks behind it. SQL injection is not so much a thing anymore because of abstraction layers, but it can still be a thing if you use it wrong, right? So keep thinking about security. For example, cross-site scripting still happens a lot. It doesn't sound as serious, but it could be very serious if it happens on a certain place, right? Also, there's tools out there. I forgot the name. It's the Composer Security Checker. Is that what it's called? Huh? Yeah? Security advisories. Yeah. Are those two separate tools or is it the same tool? Okay. We'll just imagine they're two separate tools. So there's a tool that you can use in your your build in your continuous integration, which checks for the packages that you have, and it can check are there any known security vulnerabilities for these packages, and it can warn you about them. It's a very simple way, an effective way to at least be aware of what you're putting on production. Okay, so let's dive a little bit into code review etiquette. I think most of you didn't know it existed. It doesn't exist. I made it up. But I do think it's interesting because I think the way that we communicate with each other is very important when it comes to code reviews. Sure, we say like, oh, eagless programming, an eagless programmer, but that doesn't mean you can just like say anything you want. You still have to use a certain subtleness, right? We're developers. We have hearts as well. Most of us, anyway. So code review etiquette. I have a few examples. These are all from open source repositories. And it might look like nitpicking every now and then, but I'll show you. So this is from, it looks like a Magento module. You can tell I worked with Magento. Not anymore, by the way. Don't go up to me with Magento assignments. So Person Blue says, I usually like to keep one line between functions. It looks like you have two here, and this will apply to all of my comments related to code formatting, blah, blah, blah. And then Person Red says, that was simply a mistake made when editing my code. My take from this is don't jump to conclusions. I mean, you could quite easily say, hey, it looks like there's an empty line here, or was it intentional? You can sort of assume that most of those things aren't done intentional. And actually, you can get rid of most of these useless comments by using tools like PHP CS Fixer or PHP Code Sniffer or anything else, right? Then another example is Person Red says, please use /* at far link for the class properties. And then Person Blue says, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is the right convention for this. By the way, this will not be managed by CS Fixer tools if you use it, as far as I know. Do you have a link about that? I'm curious. There comes the Coke. Excuse me. And then Person Red says, it's fine. And then Person Blue says, fine what? And then Person Red says, it's fine to put it on one line. So communicate clearly, right? This is an open source project. Most of the time, this was within the same day, so it's okay. Like it didn't impact much, but this could have costed another few days before this feature could have been merged. So make sure that you don't just say it's fine, but explain to the other person. Another example. This is from Laravel, I believe, where the person added a file exists check, and a Person Red says you can't use the file exists function. You must call functions on the file's object. Person Blue responds, thanks for the feedback, but I didn't see your main point. Honestly, please correct me if my understanding was wrong. The purpose of putting this check inside create cache directories, not to throw exception, yada, yada, yada. And then Person Red replies, not sure you understand what I meant. This class can't know about the file system. You have to make that check through another class that does. And this is what I don't really get. Why not use an example? Right? We work in a field that has a lot of remote workers. We work with people with different backgrounds, different languages, and the interesting part is one language that we all speak in PHP land is PHP. So why not use PHP to explain what you meant? It's much easier to do that than try to use English to talk about programming, right? So, I mean, GitHub is great formatting for it, syntax highlighting, so it's very easy to do. And of course, the most important thing is say thank you every now and then when someone builds something. Thank you. And of course, use GIFs. I said it right. I got it. I was reading it next slide. I was like, I'm going to get this one. Yeah, use GIFs. This is what my colleague left me on one of the progress reviews. And here's a few more in case you didn't have enough. I like the kid on the top right. He's fabulous. He's great. Are we done? All right, so moving on. Another important thing is with code reviews, you own the code as a team. You can no longer say that person wrote it, right? Because you both work on it. If you do the code review, you're responsible for the code as a team. And I still see this happen way too often, where it's like, oh, yeah, that person missed something. No, you missed it as well because we did a code review, right? It's our responsibility, not that single person's responsibility. So team effort, which also means that in your communication, you're leaving comments for people. I like to make sure that I say, we should, or I think we should do it like this, instead of I think you should do it like this. Right? Team responsibility. And maybe even more important is to ask, what do you think? There are so many developers, definitely people that just start out, junior developers, maybe interns, that are very, very smart. They're very smart. I'm scared. I'm afraid of my job. But the problem is they're maybe not as confident as other people because they haven't had the same validation that you've had. So always make sure that you ask, what do you think? Trigger them to say something about it. And don't accept them being like, oh, well, you're the lead developer, you must be right. That's a wrong thought, right? What do you think? And you'll find that there's a lot of cool answers that come out of that. It's the quiet ones who are the most interesting. So, interestingly enough, since everyone here does code reviews, this getting started is going to go. It's going to be quite simple. So for pull request reviews, you can start by introducing branching, right? The Git branching model and everything. Create a feature branch, put a pull request up against the developer master branch, and that way you can easily have a point in time where you can all look at the code before it gets merged. But also automate menial tasks like code style checks and linting. And this is the example that I mentioned earlier. You don't want to have your code review cluttered with things like, there's an empty line here. Oh, you should put a new line after this. Because that just removes the point of the, well, it doesn't remove the point, but it loses its focus, right? As a developer, you start to look for the wrong things. And seeing all these syntax things and commenting on that, it inhibits you from actually being able to look at the actual code and look at the architecture and see those things, right? Also, linting is built into PHP, so there's no excuse in not using it. PHP minus L. Although it's quite hard to do it for a role directory, but why haven't we fixed this yet? Let everyone participate. Let everyone be part of the code reviews. It's not something only a lead should do. Everyone should do it. Why? Because you're sharing knowledge. You're continuously sharing knowledge, and you want everyone's input. Everyone needs to be included. And with that, also, give everyone the right to merge. Having one or two people only do the merging is a very large bottleneck, and you don't want that. Code reviews are not meant to stop the process or introduce, how do you say this, more time. Code reviews, you still want to keep up the pace. So have everyone, give everyone the right to merge, and make sure you still move forward as a project, because some things are just not important enough to really fall over. I mean, you can even do it like 2 people do a code review, and then we merge it, right? You don't have to do one code review and then merge it. So how do you improve code reviews? What we do is we also do a functional review. So when someone creates a pull request, that person also tells us the test steps that you have to go through. And that way, as a developer, we'll be doing the functional testing as well, because the earlier on you spot a bug, the cheaper it is to fix. Right? If you spot a bug somewhere when it's already deployed or whatever, then the ticket has to be moved back. Someone has to dive into this task again and fix things, and that just takes more time. Right? So the earlier on, the better. So what we usually do is we have 2 code reviews and 1 functional review, and which can be done by 2 people, 2 different people, right? And as well, get a third opinion. I don't know why people say second opinion, but get a third opinion. If you have a discussion with another developer, it's sort of like team A versus team B, right? It seems like a very inefficient discussion to me. So when that happens, and you notice this after 3 or 4 comments on a pull request, then what we have within my team is we have the rule that the third person has the deciding vote, right? Until the third person comes with the third solution, then it's a party. But generally, there's always like two teams, right? And so we just say, okay, so we have this discussion, and the third person just makes a choice, and we move on. Because unless it's a very, very important part, it probably isn't important enough to really spend so much time on. And everyone accepts this rule, which makes it a lot easier to function as a team, definitely when you're a bigger team. Keep changes small. I think this speaks for itself. If you have a very large pull request, it does a lot with your cognitive load, right? It does a lot with because when you go through, you have to remember the state. You have to remember, oh, this changed here, so that means we can call this function here. And the bigger it gets, the harder it gets to follow all these things. So you want to make sure that you keep them small and make it easy for the reviewer. And also for yourself, really. Amen. Don't trust the developer. When a developer says, yeah, I built this and you can test it like this, or I used this method instead of this method because the other method didn't work. You don't necessarily have to question everything the developer does, but it's definitely good not to just assume that that person is indeed, or that it's indeed not possible doing it the other way. Always ask, like, why? Why did you do this? I'm interested to know, and I would like to see maybe it is possible if you do it a different way. But yeah, don't trust the developer. And something that I see happen way too few is this: review using your favorite tool. Who does, I'm not gonna necessarily call you all out on it, but who reviews using just the GitHub in your browser, files changed? Right, why? I mean, you use PHP Storm every day. Most people here have an IDE. They have some sort of environment that they're used to coding in, right? And it comes with a lot of interesting things. It gives you a possibility to click through onto functions to see which classes implement these interfaces. And that's what you're used to. So why would you limit yourself to the GitHub interface, for example, and having to just look at just simple plain text with some colors in it? You can actually pull in this code, and you can do a diff within PHP Storm, and you can see what the changes are. And you can still go and click through things. Heck, you can even see if there's methods which are unused. And these are things you don't spot on GitHub. In PHP Storm, it's nice and gray. You can tell, oh, this private method is not used anymore because we refactored something. And those are very interesting insights. You also get more of a sense of the code structure, the directory structure. And then shared vision. Shared vision for me is very important because it gives everyone a basis to base their choices on, their decisions, right? If you all have a shared vision, like we want to be here as a team or as a project, and everything that you come across along the way, you can make decisions based on knowing where you want to go, right? And this solves a lot of questions, a lot of discussions that happen on code reviews, because discussions during code reviews are very expensive. You want to keep them as small as possible, because the longer the discussions go on for, the longer the business has to wait for that feature, which is a waste. You want to deploy quickly, you want to move on, right? So make sure you have a shared vision. And one way of doing that is what we call an architectural exploration. Don't try to Google this. There's literally nothing on there. It's just something that we made up, which helped us a lot. And basically, it comes down to this. While you're coding, take notes. Things you see, things you want to improve, or things that come up during a code review, take notes. Schedule a meeting. And don't have a recurring meeting. Oh, we're going to do this every week, because you'll have meetings that aren't really useful. You want to make sure that the meetings actually, we have plenty of meetings already. Time box it to whatever time you want. Present and discuss. So talk about the things that you came across. Think, I see this thing here. We're still using this component, but it's becoming a bit messy now. And I would like to improve it. And you can even do a suggestion during this meeting and make sure everyone's involved. Invite everyone, heck, even the tester, right? Have everyone involved, all developers, and talk about it. And that way, everyone knows what the thought process is behind a decision. And when people know the thought process behind a decision, it's a lot easier to accept, right? Sometimes when you come into a project, you're like, oh, why did we use this? And you don't sometimes realize what happens that led up to that decision. And it's important to be aware of that. I also asked a last question in my survey, which was, why aren't code reviews part of your company's workflow? And these are the reasons that came up. We have 38% who says we have never discussed this, which is, to me, it's a shame, sort of. Like, you should at least mention it. You can say, no, we're not the kind of company to do code reviews. That's fine. But at least discuss it, right? Talk about it. Then we have 30% saying we feel our projects are too small to do code reviews. This is completely understandable. I mean, the company I worked for at the time, it might have been too small to do code reviews. It might not have been useful enough. You know, having those landing pages, the campaign sites that are online for like a month. I mean, sure, you can still do it, but not necessarily. I can understand that. Then we have management think it's a waste of time and money. Okay, we'll get back to that. And we have, as a developer, I don't see the value in doing code reviews, which is probably also the same person who said, I don't enjoy receiving code reviews, right? Same 4%. So to finish this talk, I have one last slide on convincing your company in 4 easy steps to stay in the whole clickbait idea. Disclaimer, I've never had to apply these steps. I literally just came up with this and thought, hey, this looks like a good idea. If you do go and try this, let me know if it works. If it doesn't work, I'll scrap this slide from the talk and I'll never talk about it again. If it does work, I win. So start the trend. Ask someone, hey, you know, can you review my code? Right? Be vulnerable. Can you review my code? I'll return the favor. I'll review your code as well. And then maybe we can learn from each other. It's a lot cheaper than sending people to trainings and workshops constantly if you can just learn from each other as well. Measure the impact. You know, how many bugs did we find during this code review? Like, what kind of improvements did we do? Show your boss, hey, look, we did a lot in just 15 minutes time, half an hour time. Everyone's like, half an hour, that's fast. I take 2 hours. No, joking. One of the reasons could be increased customer satisfaction. You know, the customer will experience less bugs, less issues when it goes into production. And developers are constantly learning from each other. It takes 15 minutes per feature, although I should probably change this because it doesn't really take 15 minutes per feature. It depends how big your features are. And make it part of the price. You know, it's not something that you as a company have to pay for. It's the quality that you want to deliver to the customer. Don't be afraid to up that price.